I was wondering where you'd gone after dinner. You sort of just disappeared. Well, I was going to come find you after I ate the dishes, so that's why it took me a little bit longer. You okay? Well, we always feel like that sometimes, and if you're this exhausted, then that makes sense. Babe, you are working your ass off for everyone. Everyone at work is pissing you off right now, and to be honest, you have a right to be a little bit annoyed. Baby, you are amazing, and you handle stress a lot better than other people might, especially better than I do. Do not make me come over there and tickle you. Don't worry, I won't. I'm on your side. Okay, so how about, because it's raining outside, and because I feel like I should be doing more for you, how about I reach to sleep? Well, we'll probably get in about 2 chapters before you fall asleep. From the tired look in your eyes, I can say that you want to go to sleep right now. Okay? Okay. You get into bed and I'll go pick out a book. Does that sound okay? Good. What to choose? This one looks alright. What about The Secrets of Sunshine? Yeah? Okay. Well, I'll read the blurb so you know what it's about. Singled out, Mitchell Fisher has said a firm goodbye to romance. He relishes his job cutting off padlocks that couples fashion to his hometown's famous love story bridge. Only his young daughter Poppy knows that behind his prickly veneer, Mitchell is deeply lonely, and he still grieves the loss of Poppy's mother. Then one hot summer's day, everything changes when Mitchell bravely rescues a woman who falls from a bridge into the river. He's surprised to feel an unexpected connection to her, but then she disappears. Desperate to find the mysterious woman, Mitchell teams up with her spirited sister Lisa to see if she's left any clues behind. There's just one, a secret message on the padlock she left on the love story bridge. How does that sound? Good. Good. Who's it by? Phaedra Patrick. It's a beautiful front cover. Okay, I'll start reading. You get comfortable. And you being comfortable is snuggled into my stomach. Great. I'm joking. You're nice and toasty warm. If you weren't as tired and stressed out, I would totally be playing my cold hands all over you now. What? It's funny. Well, it's not funny for you, but you do it to me, so I can do it to you. Okay, let's begin. The introduction. The lilac envelope. The night before. As he did often over the past 3 years, Mitchell Fisher wrote a letter he would never send. He sat up in bed at midnight and kicked off his sheets. Even though all the internal doors of his apartment were open, the sticky July heat still felt like a shroud clinging to his body. His 9-year-old daughter Poppy thrashed restlessly in her sleep in the bedroom opposite. Mitchell turned on his bedside lamp, squinting against the yellow light, and took out a pad of Basildon Bond notepaper from underneath his bed. He always used a fountain pen to write. Old-fashioned, he supposed, but he was a man who valued things that were well-constructed and long-lasting. Mitchell tapped the pen against his bottom lip. He knew what he wanted to say, but by the time his words of sorrow and regret had travelled from his brain to his fingertips, they were only fragments of what he longed to express. As he started to write, the sound of the metal nib scratching the paper helped him block out the city street noise that hummed below his apartment. Dearest Anita, another letter from me. Everything here is fine, ticking along. Poppy is doing well. The school holidays start soon, and I thought she'd be more excited. It's probably because you're not here to enjoy them with us. I've taken 2 weeks off work to spend with her, and have a full itinerary planned for us. Badminton, tennis, library visits, cooking, walking, the park, swimming, museums, a tour of the city bridges and more. It'll keep us busy, keep our minds off you. You'll be amazed how much she's grown. Must be almost your height by now. I tell her how proud I am of her, but it always meant more coming from you. Mitchell paused, resting his hand against the pad of the paper. He had to tell her how he felt. Every time I look at our daughter, I think of you. I wish I could hold you again and tell you I'm truly sorry. Yours always, Mitchell. Kiss. He read his words, always dissatisfied with them, never able to convey the magnitude of guilt he felt. After folding the piece of paper once, he sealed it into a crisp green envelope, then squeezed it into the almost full drawer of his nightstand, among all the other letters he had written. His eyes fell upon the slim lilac envelope he kept on top, the one addressed to him from Anita, that he'd not yet been able to bring himself to open. Taking it out, he held it under his nose and inhaled. There was still a slight scent of her violet soap on the paper. His fingers followed the angle of the gummed flap and then stopped. He closed his eyes and willed himself to open the letter, but his hands began to shake. Once more, he placed it back into his drawer. Mitchell lay down and hugged himself, imagining Anita's arms were wrapped around him. When he closed his eyes, the words from all the letters weighed down upon him like a bulldozer. As he turned and tried to sleep, he pulled the pillow over his head to force them away. A locked heart. The lovers who attached their padlocks to the bridges of Upchester might see it as a fun romantic gesture, but to Mitchell it was an act of vandalism. It was the hottest year on record in the city, and the morning sun was already beating down on the back of his neck. His biceps flexed as methodically opened and squeezed his bolt cutters shut, shearing the padlocks off the cast iron filigree panels of the old Victorian bridge one by one. Since local boy band Word Up filmed their video on the international smash hit Lock Me Up With Your Love on this bridge, thousands of people were flocking to the small city in the northeast of England to demonstrate their love for the band and each other. They brought locks engraved with their initials, names or messages and attached them to the city's 5 bridges. Large red and white signs that read "No Padlock" studded the pavement, but as far as Mitchell could see, the locks still hung on the railings, like bees swarming across frames of honeycomb. The constant reminder of other people's love made him feel like he was fighting for breath. As he cut off the locks, he wanted to yell, "Why can't you just keep your feelings to yourselves?" After several hours of hard work, Mitchell's trail of broken locks glinted on the pavement like a metal snake. He stopped for a moment and narrowed his eyes as a young couple strolled towards him. The woman glided in a floaty white dress and tan cowboy boots. The man wore shorts and had the physique of an American football player. With his experience of carrying out maintenance across the city's public areas, Mitchell instinctively knew that they were up to something. After breaking away from his girlfriend, the man walked to the side of the bridge, while nonchalantly pulling out a large silver padlock from his pocket. Mitchell tightened his grip on his cutters. He was once so easy and in love with Anita, but rules were rules. "Excuse me," he called out, "you can't hang that lock." The man frowned and crossed his bulging arms. "Oh yeah? And who's going to stop me?" Mitchell had the swiny physique of a sprinter. He was angular all over, with dark hair and eyes, and a handsome dorsal hump on his nose. "I am," he said, and put his cutters down on the pavement. He held out his hand for the lock. "It's my job to clear these bridges. You could get a fine." Anger flashed across the blond man's face, and he batted Mitchell's hand away, swiping off his work glove. Mitchell watched as it tumbled down onto the river below. Sometimes the water flowed prettily, but today it gushed and gurgled, a bruised grey hue. A young man had drowned here in a strong current last summer. The man's girlfriend wrapped her arms around her boyfriend's waist and tugged him away. "Come on, leave him alone." She cast Mitchell an apologetic look. "Sorry, but we're so in love. It took us 2 hours and 3 buses to get here. We'll be working miles away from each other soon. Please let us do this." The man looked into her eyes and softened. "Yeah, sorry, mate," he said sheepishly. "The heat got the better of me. All we want to do is fasten our lock." Mitchell gestured to the sign again. "Just think about what you're doing, guys," he said with a weary sigh. "Padlocks are cheap chunks of metal, and they're weighing down the bridges. Can't you get a nice ring or tattoo instead? Or write letters to each other? There are better ways to say I love, well, you know." The man and the woman shared an incredulous look. "Whatever," the man glowed, and shoved his padlock back into his pocket. "We'll go to another bridge instead. I work on those too." The couple laughed at him and sauntered away. Mitchell rubbed his nose. He knew his job wasn't a glamorous one. It wasn't the one in architecture he'd studied hard and trained for. However, it meant he could pay the rent on his apartment and buy Poppy hot lunch at school every day. Whatever daily hassle he has to put up with, he needed the work. His workmate, Barry, had watched the incident from the other side of the road. Sweat circled under his arms, and his forehead shone like a mirror as he crossed over. "The padlocks keep multiplying," he groaned. "We need to keep on going." "But it's too damn hot." Barry undid a button on his polo shirt, showing off unruly chest curls that matched the ones on his head. "It's a violation of our human rights, and no one can tell if we cut off 20 or 200. Mitchell held up his hand against the glare of the sun. "We can tell, and Russ wants the bridges cleared in the time for the city's century celebrations." Barry rolled his eyes. "There's only 3 weeks to go until then. Our boss should come down here and get his hands dirty too. At least join me for a pint after work." Mitchell's mouth felt parched, and he suddenly longed for an ice-cold beer. A vision of peeling off his polo shirts and socks and relaxing in a beer garden appeared like a dreamy mirage in his head. But he had to pick up Poppy after school club to take her to her guitar lesson, an additional one to her music class in school. Her head teacher, Miss Heathcliff, was a stickler for the school closing promptly at 5:30 p.m, and it was a rush to get there on time. He lowered his hands and said, "I'd love to, but I have to dash off later." Then he selected his next padlock to attack. Towards the end of their working day, Barry sidled up to Mitchell and wiped his brow. He crouched and packed up his toolbox before staring at his mobile phone. "Brilliant. A lady I've been messaging can meet me for a drink." Since Barry had lost 3 stone at Weight Whistler's, he discovered the enticing world of dating apps, and was now like a dog let off its leash. Mitchell had long since given up on advising him quality was better than quantity when it came to women. "You have another date?" he asked, "and we're not supposed to finish work for another 5 minutes. Barry smiled proudly. 5 minutes doesn't matter. And going out beats sitting on my own all night. Tonight's lucky lady is Mandy." He sighed, glanced at his friend. "Maybe you should get back out into the wild, too. Start to live a little." Mitchell shuddered. "I'm fine as I am, thanks. Just me and Poppy." If he ever thought about going out with someone new, his head spun. Getting dressed up, meeting someone in a bar, making light conversation, laughing politely at their jokes, debating who was going to pay for the drinks, going through that excruciating moment when you might offer to see them again, moving in for a kiss or not. And that was on the top of the babysitting logistics, because his few family members lived miles away. Before he even went on a first date, he could already picture first arguments, awkward silences, and accusations at him for being emotionally frozen, and the line, "I'm a single dad to a 9-year-old girl," wasn't an ideal conversation starter. He looked at his watch. "You go enjoy yourself," he said. "Have a pint for me." "Will do," Barry shouted over his shoulder as he walked away. Mitchell stared at his own trail of padlocks and at Barry's petite pile on the other side of the bridge. A couple of lads from the maintenance team pulled up and began to shovel up the scrap metal. Mitchell gave them a wave and rushed off along the street that followed the edge of the river. As he hurried, he didn't notice the clustered crowds of black and white Tudor shops, or the intricate carvings on the twin towers of Upchester Cathedral, the tallest building that loomed over the medieval walled city. He didn't stop to admire the glistening river Twine that gushed fiercely a few meters lower beside him, or the architecture of the 5 bridges that spanned it. He had given his own nickname to each of them. The Slab was a drab concrete construction on the far side of the city, built in the 1970s to ease traffic flow. It was more useful than attractive, and, in Mitchell's opinion, spoiled the aesthetic of its surroundings. Vicky was the next one along. The Victorian bridge he and Barry had been working on that day. It had handsome stone arches and ornate panels depicting flowers and leaves. It connected the cathedral on one side of the river to the library on the other. When he reached the 3rd bridge along, his palms itched as he spotted dozens of fresh padlocks hanging there. This was the oldest bridge in the city, with parts of it dating back to the 14th century. Mitchell christened it Archie because it had 3 pale stone arches. The newest bridge had been commissioned to celebrate the century of Upchester's city status. Due to open soon, Mitchell named it the Yacht. It was super modern. All sleek white railings and thin struts that looked like laces of a lady's corset, securing 2 tall white masts to the road. He called his favourite bridge Redford because of its red bricks. It was a sturdy construction, erected 150 years ago. It might look dull and traditional, but it did its job. As he crossed over Redford, the people he passed came at him in twos, like animals boarding Noah's Ark. They laughed and kissed with abandon, and Mitchell picked up his pace, finding it painful to witness. He still saw Anita sometimes, catching glimpses from the corner of his eye of her copper-brown curls in a crowd, or a flash of her favourite tomato red coat. Every time he felt as if someone had stabbed his heart. His breath would catch and he'd crane his neck to look for her, desperate to see her one more time. As he strode on, Mitchell noticed a woman standing in the middle of the bridge's pavement. Her dress was vibrant, a daffodil yellow. Everyone else was heading across the bridge, but she was stationary, absolutely still. So people had to part and move around her. As Mitchell drew closer, he noticed her nose had a bump on the bridge that made him feel an immediate kinship with her. Her walnut curls reminded him of Anita's hairstyle. Her warm, familiar smile seemed to say, "Oh, fancy seeing you here," but he was certain he'd never seen her before. He couldn't help staring at her, as if catching sight of his own reflection in a shop mirror, and doing a double take. As they caught each other's eyes, a wash of colour circled his neck, but he found it difficult to look away. "You're still in love with Anita, remember?" Mitchell's eyes fell upon the sweep of her collarbone and her shoulders, before stopping on the shiny thing in her hand. It was large, heart-shaped, and glinted intermittently gold, and then white in the late afternoon sunlight. A padlock. He gritted his teeth as the woman stepped towards the railing and stooped to secure her lock. After straightening back up, she tossed its key into the river and peered down at the water. She brushed her hair with her hand, then patted her ear. Her forehead furrowed as she spun around on the spot, searching on the pavement. Then she looked over the railing at the narrow ledge on the other side. Mitchell wondered what she'd lost, but told himself that he did not have time to help her find it anyway. His view was obstructed by a young man carrying a large shiny shovel on his shoulder and a few other passerbys. When he saw the woman again, she was leaning over the railing on her tiptoes, searching for something on the other side. Her fingers padded around as she raised her leg off the ground, pointing her foot to balance herself as if performing a ballet move. A feeling of worry reared up inside him at her precarious position. "Hey, be careful," he called out. His view was interrupted again by a large group of students traipsing along. When they had passed, Mitchell stared at the spot where the woman had stood, except she was no longer there. He saw a flash of her yellow dress through the railings, vivid in the rushing river below. "Damn," he said out loud, and in a split second all thoughts of Anita flew from his mind. He dropped his toolbox on the ground, ran, and swung his legs over the railing with ease. When the base of his back caught against the ledge on the other side, he knew a jolt of pain should accompany it, but Mitchell didn't feel anything as he crashed down into the violent water. Pete... She's fallen asleep. She always does when it's interesting. Good night, sweetheart. I get some sleep myself. At least I have a personal radiator. Good night, baby.